Next on the program is a panel which has to do with life design. And that's really something that's also been central to conversations within the coalition for quite a while. And a lot of that comes out of the Life Design Lab from Stanford. Some of our early meetings, we had Bill Burnett, we had Dave Evans. In fact, our first in-person conference, we had Bill Burnett come and talk about the Stanford Design Lab and the impact it's having on students. So we want to bring in people within our community, or our budding community, to talk about their experiences related to life design. And we have Dana Humphrey, who will be moderating that panel for us and introducing the panelists. So Dana, you have heard from many, many times in the organization of the conference. She's really one of the driving forces behind pulling all these together. But she is, in fact, also very much the Associate Director of the Coalition for Transformational Education, as well as our managing editor for Learning Well magazine. So we're very thankful that she's here to lead this panel. She's previously been Associate Director of the Mary Christie Institute. She's worked on various public research projects at Northeastern University's Beauvais College of Health Sciences, John Snow Inc., and Boston Medical Center. And she received her MPH from Boston University School of Public Health and her BA in Sociology from the Colorado College. Dana.
Hello, everyone. So I have the distinct honor of introducing our panelists. Adrienne Osden-Moore serves as Assistant Vice President and Executive Director of the Jeffrey H. Radville Center for College and Life Design at Bowling Green State University. Within that life design program, BGSU students learn to maximize their academic experience, prioritize their well-being, make connections, and jumpstart their careers, all with a sense of purpose, something we're talking a lot about today. Adrienne's role includes oversight of all life design curriculum, as well as the deciding student program for students who have not yet selected a major. And she's worked in higher education for the past 20 years, and her work over the last decade has focused on education innovation, design thinking, cross-disciplinary collaboration, and vocational wayfinding. And she's part of the global community of life design educators that originated at Stanford, something I'm sure we'll talk about a lot. I know a bunch of them are here today and have come from New York all together. And continues to stay involved in Stanford's Life Design Studio for University Educators. Dustin Liu, also part of that community, is the Senior Associate Director of the NYU Stern Initiative on Purpose and Flourishing. He leads the strategic direction of the organization, encouraging connections between research and practice, managing strategic partnerships, and overseeing the design and implementation of the initiative's programming. Most recently, he was lecturer at Stanford University and was the associate director of the Stanford Life Design Lab, where he taught the principles of design thinking and guided students as they developed their own answers to the tough questions in life, education, and vocation. And Laura Shaw is a social psychologist with 30 years of university teaching experience in psychology and student success programs, and she is the lead faculty for the Explore program at Arizona State University. She has created the Explore program's portfolio of courses, including their Life by Design course, which uses design thinking steps and skills to help students create lives of meaning, purpose, and joy. So join me in welcoming you to this panel.
That's a lot.
So we're going to begin by talking about definitions of life design. It is emerging as a powerful framework in higher education, but it can mean different things in different contexts. So starting with you, Adrienne, I'm going to ask, how do you define life design, and what does it look like in practice on your campus?
Absolutely. Thanks, Dana. So to keep it as simple, I was going to say, do we need to read?
Just be in a circle.
Okay. Let us get settled. We got to get comfortable, folks. Okay, now we're ready. So to keep it as simple as humanly possible, if you think about design thinking as a creative problem-solving framework that's used by lots of different industries to deal with wicked problems, big problems of the world, apply that to your college experience and your life, and that's life design. At BGSU, we started using the Stanford curriculum, taught by Bill Burnett and others there, and have continued to adapt and evolve it for our students. So as you mentioned in my intro, we focus on 5 focus areas. So we commit from orientation, day one, that we are committed to helping our students maximize their academics, because they are there to get a degree, to make really strong connections on campus and beyond, to prioritize their well-being, to jumpstart their career, and to do all of that with a sense of purpose. And for us, purpose doesn't mean you have it all figured out. Purpose just means you understand, why are you in college right now? What are you hoping to get out of this experience? And how can we help you as a student achieve your career and life goals? So just structurally, at BGSU, we were very fortunate to have 2 endowed centers created a few years ago. The Radville Center, we focus a lot with our first-year students. A lot of our life design curriculum is integrated into introductory courses. And we also have life design coaches. So any student is able to access one-on-one coaching from our team or from partners across campus. And then we work really closely with our Career Hub and our Division of Student Engagement and Success. So we're very fortunate to have a university integrated model of life design.
Thank you. Adrienne has been to this conference before, a few years ago, as Keith may have mentioned. And so she's far along in this journey of life design. Dustin, you just arrived at NYU in the past year. So how does it different at NYU?
Yeah, I'm happy to sort of answer this with an old hat and a new hat. The Stanford Life Design Lab typically determines life design as a human-centered iterative approach to navigating ambiguity and change. And for me, really simply, that is a framework for meaning-making for students. It really is a 4-step process. How do you get really curious about yourself and your interests? How do you start talking to people that you're interested in? How do you try things? And then how do you tell your story? NYU is a really interesting, decentralized, diverse community. Every single college approaches life design just a little bit differently. I'll give 2 really quick examples. At Stern, the School of Business, we use it in career wayfinding. What does it mean for us to prepare students as they enter their MBA experience or their business school experience to start noticing, what are my values? What do I value? Who do I want to be? What do I want? And use the design thinking process to start testing some of those components. For an example, in our School of Professional Studies, where we're working with mid-career professionals or working with international students that are coming to the US for the first time, it really is an opportunity to use that as a process for orientation and also use that as a process for personal wayfinding. So it's been really interesting because this idea of trying things, this idea of prototyping the spirit of life design is actually manifesting in many different ways across NYU. But for us, it really comes down to the basic idea that it's a human-centered iterative process for navigating that ambiguity.
And I'm sure it will become a theme over the course of our discussion that these conversations start early in the process as students arrive on campus. Laura, you have been to a Stanford course, and you have taken those learnings and adjusted them a little bit differently at ASU. So how does it look for Arizona State?
Yeah, I attended in summer of 21, but it happened to be the year after I actually wrote our life design course. I came across the book shortly after it was published and recognized immediately the process that I had gone through and my friends and colleagues were going through as they were facing challenges in life and in their careers, and I knew this was work that my students needed to do. At the time, I was working with students on academic probation and those underprepared academically. I currently work with students who are exploring major and possible career options. I knew they needed to do the work, but I found very often they weren't ready to do the work. They didn't know how to do it. So in the summer of 2020, the pandemic brought me an interesting opportunity to actually design our own version of a life design course. And so I jumped at the opportunity. But my goal was to build a very granular, step-by-step how-to approach to life design, informed by my work as a social psychologist, very interested in emotion and motivation across my career. But I wanted to teach students how to do this important work. Many of the students we serve at ASU are first-generation students. In the Explore program, I teach first-year, first-semester students. And so it really is a step-by-step sort of approach. So it's a little different than the way other folks have approached it, but very much guided by those same design thinking steps and skills to empower students.
So I think that's a good segue into our next question. So life design helps students navigate their academic and professional journeys with intentionality, but each student comes with their own unique set of challenges and strengths. goals and backgrounds. So, Laura, we'll start with you.
Yeah.
How does Life Design on your campus meet the diverse needs of students, particularly those that face systemic barriers? And can you share some examples of how it has helped those students overcome those challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the work I do in the class starts with vocabulary. The first third of our course focuses on empathy. Their design challenge is to how to get the most out of their time at ASU. But we really focus on that deep self-knowledge and self-reflection in the first third of the course. And particularly for students who are first generation, who haven't had college conversations growing up, they don't often have a good, useful working vocabulary to describe even who they are. So when we do, what are your core values? We give them lists of values. We talk about values. We do value sorting. We try to help them see sort of what hangs together. Same thing with strengths. What do you think your strengths are? We do some strength assessments. Do those make sense for you? What do your friends and family say your strengths are? And so a lot of it is really just starting at a very basic level. And I think students who often are assumed to not have a lot of social capital, in fact, do, they just can't name it. And they can't identify the examples from their lives because they don't have that vocabulary. And so I think, again, just like with emotional intelligence, having some real granularity in your understanding of emotions helps you move through those emotional spaces. The same thing applies to a lot of these life design principles and just basic self-knowledge, that you have to have a strong working vocabulary, one, to identify those things. So see them in yourselves to find value in yourselves, but also in that self-presentation, how you share it with other people. And so because we start at the very basic level of who you are as a person, we can meet students wherever they are and give voice to all the value and insights they bring to
I see
their
a lot
life
of nodding.
design.
Is this resonating
Yeah.
with the two of you?
Yes, absolutely. So I know for our students, and just even in all of our conversations, sometimes we'll hear from folks, well, purpose, that's a very privileged thing, or the idea that you can dream anything and design it into existence is really privileged. And we really take the approach that we want to make sure all of our students are being given access to build and develop these skills and tools. And so one way that we're able to do that is to create an intentional experience for all of our first year students where they can spend that time figuring out, even if it's just as simple as, why am I in college right now? And that answer might not be this really lofty philosophical thing. It might be, I'm ready to get out of my house and explore what else is out there, and that's okay. And so we want to validate that. And I think also, something that we built into the BGSU model is the importance of space. And so when we opened our Radville Center, I started with the motto that said, it's my goal, it's our goal to make sure that every student finds their people and their place at BGSU. And if you don't know where to start, please come to the Radville Center. And we've lived that out. And so I think really just how do we help make sure that hopefully there is no student out there on our campus that just feels completely lost in the cracks and unseen. That we can help connect them to the resources and the people that matter to them.
Yeah. How does that apply at the Stern School?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I think a common misconception with life design is that we're ignoring constraints and we're just designing for nothing. When in actuality, design thinking is all about what can we do, how might we design within the constraints that an individual or student has. So first and foremost, I think the process of being a designer, these mindsets of what it means to be a designer, of having agency, of having hope, of having courage, are all highly important for us to instill in students that may not feel agency or may be impacted by systemic barriers. The second thing that I'll share, and I'm looking at Urmila Venkatesh, my former colleague, we used to teach a first-year course called Designing Near Stanford. That was all about helping students develop narrative capital. What does it mean for them to actually develop language to tell their own story and feel like their own story matters and that there's strength in those stories? In that process, in the design process, in the You Are Here process that's on the design thinking framework, we really start by helping those students navigate and wayfind what their journeys have been so far and to help them understand that they've overcome challenges before. So there's something to be said around also allowing students to recognize that they have these skills. We're practicing them in college. Maybe just a final anecdote from NYU, a lot of our students, and I'm talking about MBA and business students, come in with a very clear idea of the 4 companies that they want to work at and the salary that they want when they graduate college, right? And it's been really interesting for me to recognize that life design is an opportunity to just trouble that
Yeah.
It invites an opportunity for students to actually start articulating, and this is a really hard question, what do you want? What do you value? I so appreciate you bringing up the value piece.
Yeah.
Because we did a survey of our students, and we found that only 32% of students could actually define what a value was, and only 7% of our students were actually able to articulate their own personal values. So much of our work now is actually on that empathy step. How can life design actually be a framework for us to move through this process of self-discovery and also taking those small steps to start actualizing what we want, what we can do, and what we should do?
I love that. I'm thinking about Angela Lindner. She's somewhere in this auditorium. We had a conversation months ago about the Quest program at University of Florida. Very different idea, but it tackles the big questions. And she described it as the wobble. Students begin to question what their deeply held beliefs. So I love that they start to question, oh, this is the path that my life will take. So switching gears a little bit, we talked about challenges for students. What challenges have you all encountered in implementing life design, either at Stanford or NYU? And maybe we'll start with you, Dustin. Whether institutional, cultural, or student-related, and how have you worked to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, I struggle to call it a challenge, but I would call it an important consideration, which is the people that are facilitating these programs. We have found that so much of the life design process is community-oriented, and it's through that process that you develop a really strong relationship with whoever's facilitating the course or facilitating the program. So getting really clear on how we can equip our educators, our facilitators, our coaches with this language has been really helpful. The second opportunity, once again, not framing it as a challenge, is just getting people used to the language. And we found this to be a barrier of entry, right? What does it mean to actually have an institution that adopts life design language? It actually needs to be socialized, and it needs to be aligned and calibrated and spread and talked about throughout the university. When it only happens in pockets, it can feel like sort of a flash in the pan. We're starting to think really strategically at NYU, how do we build this into orientation? How do we build this into the multiple parts of the student experience so that students don't feel blindsided or don't feel like it's a new model or a new framework that they need to engage with? In so many ways, I see life design as a flexible enough framework or an umbrella framework that can actually be an organizing framework for students to navigate their college experience. So I think just the language and the literacy around life design, of course, institutional buy-in and getting the right leaders on board in order to do that, and then just from a fundamental point, the manpower in order to sort of support these programming are three things that I'm constantly thinking about. Similar?
Yeah. I mean, I think at BGSU we've been really fortunate that it started with our president and even our board of trustees and some other senior leaders who really wanted to take the idea of redefining student success seriously, and really care about this idea of how are we fostering our students to have great careers and great lives. And that those two things are connected. I think for us, we've been able to integrate life design and this idea of intentionally designing your BGSU experience, even early in admissions. Parents love to say, "Oh, I wish I had this. I wouldn't have done this. I would have figured this out. I would have saved myself 10 years of stress." Yeah, well, then you can imagine how that goes over with their student who's standing next to them. So sometimes it's hard when we're selling vitamins instead of Tylenol. And so sometimes our harshest critics are our students who don't yet know, like if they're not feeling that stress or that disconnect or that, lost element. And so we really just try to get them connected to it quickly, and make it as relevant as possible. So sometimes that means, for a lot of our students, their first introduction to design thinking is a sprint around sleep and the roommate who has a different set of habits than you do. And as simple as that seems, that helps our students kind of click and like, oh, that thing we did in class, I tried it, it worked. And so then they kind of can buy into the process and then start to see that that was really helpful, Dana. I think I'm going to try something else.
Can I just say vitamins, not Tylenol, is like my favorite Adrian line.
I don't know. It might have come from someone else. We might have to give it a credit.
But it's so true, right?
True.
We're helping students develop that.
Yeah. I could just say ditto to everything you just said, Adrian. We were talking over lunch just about how we're trying to, again, increase the vocabulary of the staff that work with students as well. So one thing in your folder is an example of an advising tool we've designed that matches, have created advising tools that match modules in the course. So a student shows up for advising in week 6, they know that we're talking about mind mapping yourself and pulling together all these different pieces of self-knowledge that we've been working on through the course so that advisors can continue to have those kinds of conversations. Again, we serve exploring students looking for majors, but we're looking to then hopefully reach out and start training other advisors in other colleges. You know, ASU, if nothing, we have scale. And so to try to start reaching out to other colleges so that it is a shared language, so that not only do we launch students off into majors, but they find people there who can talk the same talk, because as we all know, life design is not something that stops at the end of your first semester. That's just the beginning. And these students hopefully are going to be questioning more than most students do because they're comfortable sitting in some of that uncertainty and knowing, oh, you know what, this path is playing out a little differently than I thought. Let me find my way to a different job or a different opportunity. And so we want the staff and other faculty they encounter to be able to sort of move through this process with them so that they get that support throughout.
Yeah, and I do encourage everybody to look at that handout because it's
Yeah.
I should have started this with I'm a huge life design fangirl. I read the book and I called my brother and I sent him the book, and then I wanted us to go, you know, he lives far away and we were going to go through it together, all the activities together. So I just think it's so interesting and so fun to do these things and to explore through those little activities.
Well, we do a project in class called What Problems Do You Want to Solve? What are the things in the world you care about? And it's very similar to the Hacking College book that we're going to hear more about, but this idea of field of study. You know, find some directions you want to head in, but some students they don't come in with the 4 companies necessarily that they want to work for. They just know that their parents think they should be engineers, and they have no idea what people even do at work or what they want to do. So again, the advising tools will help support that work. And we also have peer coaches in our courses, and we're working to train them too in this language so that they're surrounded by these kinds of conversations.
So I want to change tack again and talk about measurement and how you know these life design programs are successful. So I'll start with you, Adrian, because I know you brought stats.
I brought my little sheet, but I was writing
How
it
do
down.
you assess the impact of the programs on students' well-being, engagement, and other long-term outcomes?
Yeah, so at BGSU, it's been hard to measure even from the beginning because there's not been a true control group, right? We've infused it in so many different ways across campus that it's hard to measure those things. But, you know, a lot of our impact is through our students, right? Qualitatively, what are we seeing in the ways that just the confidence that they have and their ability to adapt and navigate, you know, different challenges. But we do what we call an enhanced dashboard at different points in the year that are really just a snapshot of our students. And so we had about 1,300 students who were in our first year cohort this year who took a life design course respond to that instrument at the end of December. And I can say that 91% of them said they understand why they're in college, and 79% said, I believe life design can provide tools to help me explore purpose. So if I've got 80% that think that there's at least something there, right, that's a lot for us to build on. And the majority of students also said that they felt that their problem-solving skills had increased in their first semester, that their sense of resilience, that their self-awareness. And even in those small incremental ways, like just them being able to start to acknowledge and recognize that some of these things that we've been talking about all day are having even just the smallest of impacts on their experience, I think is really just the beginning of what we can start to measure.
Wow, really wish there was a control group on that 90% stat. I would love to know.
I have to work on it.
Like a peer institution. I don't know that anyone would want to go up against the 90% though. So understanding that these things are very challenging to measure, I wonder, Dustin, if you have some.
Yeah, I mean, a starting place is that every single life design program is perhaps targeting different things. So I've worked with community colleges through my role at Stanford, where they were really focused on helping stop out students explore what higher education might look like when they come back, right? Or another school is really focused on retention, another school is focused on recruitment, another school is really focused on helping students with career navigation. And I think getting really clear about the goals of a program help with that metrics assessment. At least in our context, we're getting really curious about how life design can actually support from a psychometric assessment, these ideas of self-efficacy or agency or hope, right? These things that are a little bit harder to assess. There are some established psychometric assessments that we're using. But what's actually been most meaningful is the stories that we're getting from students, specifically longitudinally. There are really a wide variety of students that do come back and tell us that they're in careers and they're into the workforce and they've considered a place that they're feeling stuck, and they pull out these life design tools. One of my most impactful teaching moments was when I stopped a student on campus and I saw him with a design thinking framework in hand, and he was like, oh, I just pulled this out because I was feeling stuck. Right? What does it mean for us to actually notice? There are moments when students are able to draw on some of these mindsets and practices, get really clear about what those mindsets and practices are, and if we're able to ask students to share moments or stories of places that they've been able to apply those mindsets and practices, I think it's demonstrating the impact of the program. Last thing that I'll say is that because every life design program is different, we found it really hard to do some cross-institutional analysis. We tried 2 years ago with Adrian, part of that conversation as well. But because every single program is quite different, I think it comes down to what we want the goals for that student to be, what the purpose of higher education is for a particular institution, and to work backwards from there to consider how life design can really support those goals.
That was a perfect segue, because partly for us, our goals have come in clearer focus just in the last couple of years. So 2022, I moved over to the Explore program, and so now we're just starting to get some institutional data so that we can look at things like persistence, retention, GPA, those sorts of things. We want to track students through majors and graduation rates. The one hard number I've got is our fall to spring retention for our first semester students was 97%. 97%. We're at the ceiling. It's not going to get much higher than that. But they're sticking around. We're keeping them engaged in this process. And the students we serve as an institution like ASU pushes students into majors early. And so we're getting students who somehow don't know, haven't declared, haven't sort of gotten caught up in those nets. And so we would expect our retention rates to be lower. And in fact, that was the highest of any college at ASU this year. So lots of internal data, lots of student feedback. I mean, stories that just bring tears to your eyes. Students who say, this is the first class that was about me, for me. Mm-hmm. Like, you're asking these questions that I know I need to answer, but I haven't been sure how to ask them and how to do that. And so we were talking about challenges earlier, too. Part of it is just we try to put, ours is a 3-credit course, try to put seasoned faculty in the classroom. We keep numbers low because those are really conversations that we have. Class time is super interactive, but we have these ongoing conversations with students through the work that they do and the feedback that we give. So this next year is our big data year, and starting to formalize and pull all of that together so that we will have numbers to maybe share next year.
Yeah, but thank you both for mentioning stories, because we've talked a lot about stories today. It's come up in many different presentations, and of course we had an activity all around it, and it is an important part of all of our work and the work of the coalition through Learning Well. Shout out for Marge. It's just a really important piece, and I agree that really is so impactful to hear those stories. So my last question before we open it up to the audience: higher education is evolving. We'll hear a lot about that in our next panel, I'm sure. So are the needs of students. So how do you all see life design adapting to meet the challenges of today and today's students?
I will say, so the premise of life design and design thinking is that we're teaching our students to be flexible, adaptable, creative problem solvers. So I'm putting the future of humanity in their hands and hoping for the best. But I think also recognizing that, particularly the idea of the relevance of higher ed, that college is an investment, and is it worth it? I think for us, it has been really helpful to help us frame that messaging. We've been really fortunate that our enrollment and our retention rates have been at record highs in a time when that is not necessarily the case across the board, because we have been so intentional about helping our students and their families see that by being really intentional in designing their college experience and what we've created as a student success model is going to help that pay off in dividends. And I think also another just adaptable piece is recognizing there's so much about career and career outcomes right now. And that's obviously very important too, but we've even gone so far as to start to show like the job outlooks reports, right? Like where the top two are creative problem solving and the ability to work on a team. And we say, we actually do this in the first semester in team-based work through life design and introducing you to the concepts of design thinking. And so I think just trying to keep it as relevant as humanly possible.
Yeah, agile and adaptable is what I say all the time. This design thinking process will keep you agile and adaptable. And we talk a lot about NACE competencies, but again, providing working vocabulary that's meaningful not only to students, but to their professors and to employers is really important. Then we're all speaking the language. And again, naming those things helps students see it in their everyday activities, in class, for homework. It helps them make sense and make meaning out of the things that they're doing. And they find that process pretty powerful. And I think it will serve them well.
I just appreciate in both of those points about how this is a lifelong journey, right? This idea of asking the question, what's my purpose? Who am I? What can I do? What am I good at? Is something that students will continue to come back to. And I think in a moment where AI is disrupting what we perceive to be the labor market, in a moment where some of our most stable jobs in our country, right, government jobs, are being eliminated, in a moment where we're seeing students have high anxiety around economic security, around being able to have a life that they had imagined when they first entered college. Life design has been an amazing way for students to actually have language and at least a next step to discover what comes next. And I think so much of life design is about learning by doing. And I hope that the students that go through any of our programs come out with this idea that even if I feel stuck, even if the world feels super ambiguous, by trying something small, by taking a prototype, we actually learn something and move forward in some way, shape, or form. So I think in the context of the role of higher education and the context of the world, the labor market that we're in a fast-changing, hyper-ambiguous moment. And I think having the opportunity to think like designers and actually support students in developing those designer mindsets and practices is going to be mission critical.
Well, I'm inspired, so why don't we open it up to questions for the audience? Do we have mics? Yeah. Right here in the middle.
Hardest location.
Great. Thank you so much. My name is Harrison Mullen. I'm from Boston College. And one of the things that I was curious about was the pulled up short moment that some students might have when contemplating or engaging with the life design framework, which is like, I don't know what I want to do, or I don't know what's worth wanting. And it's that second question of what is worth wanting that I was curious about and how you engage students with that, and if there are any sorts of resources that you connect them with to navigate that question. Yeah.
You're looking at me. I think something, and I said this when I was here with President Rogers 2 years ago, I think something that has been so influential for me is the actual tangible steps and processes within the life design framework. And not that you have to be doing it the same exact way, but instead of feeling like, we do Mythbusters all the time, this idea that I have to be 100% sure if something is going to work out before I take the first step. And so instead of having a whole existential crisis, let's focus on what's in front of you right now, what's that first step, and prototyping is that. And so one of the things we try to emphasize a lot to all of our students is that I want you to think about every experience in college as a prototype. Every class, every job, every career visit, every club, organization, because I think what I seem to notice is it just takes the stress levels down about 100 degrees. Okay, I don't have to have it all figured out. I can focus on one thing that I do have within my sphere of control right now.
I was going to say, one thing that I run into is when we talk about what problems do you want to solve and they have no answer for that, sometimes they get so hung up on what they're going to be or what kind of work they're going to do, and we try to back off of that and think about how do you want to work? When do you feel really engaged? What are the kinds of activities that you like? That sometimes the context or the company or the product won't matter a whole lot if you're working in a way that's meaningful to you. So I have a student who came to me not long ago and said, what kind of work do you want to do? She goes, I don't understand what anybody does at work except for food service people. Like that was her frame of reference. And so she felt like college was not for her. And we started talking, and basically it came down to she likes working with people, she likes helping and supporting people. And I'm like, well, guess what? Any job can be a helping profession. That you will be that kind of person on any kind of team. You don't have to focus so much on exactly what you want to do. Think about the kinds of things you want to do. So we talk about flow states, but really we just try to use language, when do you feel engaged? What's important to you? Sometimes that reframe is enough to give them space to not have to decide right away. And then I'm like, if you keep that at the core, you'll recognize the right opportunities when they come along. So you may never have thought about working for an insurance company, but the position advertised is something that would allow you to work in ways that are important to you. So I find purpose and meaning often come after you do the hard work, not before. That it comes from experience and practice and seeing those results. And sometimes we need to get students just in the door to do things. And so this idea that there is one answer or that answer is knowable, if you've been around the block enough, you know that doesn't always happen.
I'll go super tactical with this question. I think students just want data. And we found it really, really helpful to bring assessments to the table to help students gain language and literacy around their aptitudes and their values. So two practical things that NYU is doing. We do a lot of work around values literacy. What does it mean to give students an understanding of what values are and what their values are? And we consider that getting students really clear about what they want. What are the organizing principles that they want to use to design their life? The second piece is aptitudes, like what you can do, what your gifts are. And I think oftentimes we ask students, and we found really a lot of success in having them sort of put down a flow journal, but also sometimes assessments can be really helpful. Career assessments can be helpful. We use aptitude assessments, we use cognitive aptitude assessments, we use career traits compass, we dive into Enneagram. We try to give students as many tools as possible to at least react to something, to start noticing how these bits of data come together. I think the idea of developing your own self-portrait can be quite challenging, but when you have paints and you have different colors on the table, you have a better understanding of how to discern who you are and where you might want to go.
Any other questions? I should know that. Oh, yeah. Harley?
Hi, my name's Harley Ramsey. Thank you all so much. In passing, Dustin said something that was so insightful. You linked self-discovery and empathy. And I'm wondering, what does that look like in terms of workshops or context? How can I help foster that? And how does that look different for the three of you? But thank you for that insight.
Yeah. I can start. So our semester, when we teach life design, follows the design thinking process, and empathy is a huge phase of that. And so we spend a lot of time getting to know each other and getting to know yourself. And so I think that's really that core, like foundational element is just even for some of our students recognizing, people have different backgrounds than you, people have different experiences than you, but also that self-empathy piece. So how did you get here? You talked earlier, Laura, about and you both we all have, about sort of validating the experiences that the students already have had and are bringing with them. And that storytelling, we do different wayfinding and storytelling activities early on that really just starts to create this sense of community, hopefully, in the classroom, and that empathy for each other, because then they're able to celebrate with each other, help each other work through challenges, and that's what we want them to continue.
Textbook answer, +1.
Thanks, Dustin.
Yeah, the only thing that I'll add is that the empathy piece is just getting really curious around who you are.
Yeah.
And it starts with self-empathy, and it starts with recognizing that we can't change any of the decisions or any of our life path before this current moment, and really starting from where you are, and helping students really arrive. And the second thing that I'll just add to this is students can't solve a problem that they're not willing to have. Right? So much of this work is actually helping them get really curious. What's a question that you're having? How can design thinking help you get there? Requires a deep level of empathy and care for oneself before you can actually engage in that process.
As a faculty member, I have to add my 2 cents to everything, even though I totally agree with what you said. One thing that we find, too, the first chunk of our class is empathy. The second is are mindsets that really support the work of life design. So we do curiosity and creativity, but also mindsets that help support students while they're doing this very hard work. So we talk about optimism and hope and facing challenge and what you can learn from failure, but we talk about imposter feelings too. And so many students feel like, I'm the only one who doesn't know what I want to be when I grow up. I'm the only one struggling with this. And so much of what we do in class involves interacting with each other. It's one of those classes students often say, this was the class where I made my friends my first year. But we have lots of conversations, building a lot of trust to get to those vulnerable places. But I think understanding that the problems you face are a whole lot more universal. And I often talk about the work in the classes. This is the work of being human. And everybody does this work, whether you see it or not. And I think some of those things really do then open the door to feel for other people. You see both yourself and their experience, but you have a better understanding of what I think is really going on beneath the surface. So I think all of this, the more you learn about yourself, really does open the door to learning about others.
Oh, one from Michael, front. Keith, you're going to have to let me know the time. I have no idea.
We'll just keep going all day, so at some point someone will have to stop. Justin and Laura and I could talk about this for years.
Great. Well, I really enjoyed your conversation, and I've looked into design thinking in various ways and love the way it thinks about these questions in more expansive and creative ways. And so my question is about character, and you mentioned empathy, and you mentioned curiosity, hope, creativity. And I wonder, when you think about design thinking and life design, are there any constraints on what life one designs? So could someone design a life to be a really effective villain, right? Or to maximize their profit in ways that goes only to them and others? Are there any moral constraints on how you think about life design? Are there ways in which you are trying to sort of avoid individualism, this kind of self-creation, without recognizing the way communities form us or shape us? So where does kind of community or the world's needs come into this? And are there limits or moral limits on what is acceptable life design? How do you help students think about those questions when they think about their own life?
I'm looking at you, Dustin.
I can kick off, and then I'm going to invite folks to jump in. You're asking this question to someone who's doing this work in a business school, and a lot of our students are very focused on questions and values of affluence and luminance and impact and radius, and I use those words because at least in the classroom we try not to have any value judgment around what values our students have, and more so invite them to consider what does your life look like as it bends towards authenticity throughout the lifespan. So I think just sort of zooming out and inviting students to say, here's the 5-year, 10-year, 40-year time horizon. What does a meaningful life look like to you has been a helpful question. The second thing that I think you're bringing up is this idea that oftentimes these questions become so individualistic. From a global perspective, when we talk about life design in Asian countries or more community-oriented countries, a huge proponent of our life design program is National Taiwan University, and their life design model really focuses on this community question. So we've noticed that some students may veer towards those community questions based on their own cultural backgrounds, and we really want to honor that and index on that as well. This idea of what it means to live a good life, what it means to live a moral life, I think is something that we're still continuing to explore, and some of the ethics or some of the questions that we're hoping students will explore personally. At least from like a life design angle, I think inviting students to get really clear around their values, what they can do, their aptitudes, and what they should do, that should is actually where that ethics question comes in. Where can you have your most impact? What kind of career path really matches with your values? There are situations that I sit down with a student and I'm like, do you really want to be a consultant for 40 years in this particular industry? Why is that? And helping students actually articulate that why is where that moral conversation comes in. And I think so much of that work actually happens in relationship rather than through an assignment or through an Odyssey plan. Inviting students to start developing their story around their why and developing their story around their values is a great place for that starting place. We haven't figured it out yet, and I think in a business school it's particularly challenging, but some of those tensions certainly are present.
No, these will be fun conversations to keep having. It is a value-neutral process, really. I think students could use it to various ends. It is interesting, especially with working with first-semester students, they check each other. And we do talk about what is meaning to you? What is happiness? What is a good life? One of the through lines for our class is there are many ways to live a happy and successful life. There are many ways. You don't just have to be an engineer. You can do lots of different things. And what are those things? But students are good about having those conversations with each other. The only few that I've had that have been so focused on, I just want to make a lot of money. Students are quick to help unpack some of that too. Really? Really? That's all you want? And those conversations evolve. So some of it is letting them sort through that. I mean, a lot of this is just sitting in uncertainty and discomfort sometimes. But just giving them space to wrestle with those things, I think they very often find their way in ways that are pleasing and gratifying. Yeah.
I think also, although now you have me really intrigued about a 5-year pathway for a villain, and I feel like now
Yeah.
like
Maybe offer that as a
create
prompt.
class example, like just to see. But I think also sometimes the things that come out on the surface as really selfish, this framework and this course gives the time and the space to really unpack that. I remember when I was teaching at a different institution with juniors and seniors, there was a graduating senior, and he was so focused on enough money to buy a boat. And look, I like the water just like anybody else, but he was very, very focused on this boat. And it took us weeks, and the whole class would roll their eyes about the boat. But when we really got down to it, it was that he saw that as financial security for his future family. And so for him, making that amount of money to get a boat meant that when he was in his 40s, he could take his kids out on the lake, which is what he had already dreamed of. And I would like to think that everyone has that somewhere in their depths.
Well, I remade the rest of the curriculum in the Explore program. So after our 3-credit Life by Design class, students take a 1-credit course that helps them narrow in on their major or minors or certificates that they want to get. But we talk about the arrival fallacy, that very often you hold out, if I can just get that boat, everything else will be fine. And we talk about how often when you get to that arrival point, turns out you're still you.
Yeah.
And you have all the same problems and challenges you thought you would. So we try to unpack a lot of things for students and really challenge notions that if you have the right major, or if you get the right internship, or if you get the right job in the right city for the right salary, you're going to be happy. Because chances are your happiness is going to come from the pursuit. The achievement sometimes is associated with a little disappointment. And so I think trying to not to burst the bubble, but to prepare them for that no one accomplishment, that's not what a happy life is made of generally. So again, really serious, important values discussions that probably don't feel like or sound like values discussions to them initially, but to start getting them thinking about those things.
Thank you. I think that's all we have time for, but they're here all night, so
Thank you all.
So, thank you.
Thanks, Dana.